Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.
This is WheelBearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad.
So this is episode 6. We've made it. What we've got this week is we're going to talk about MobilEye and the democratization of cartography. There's some words. The new GM and Ford automatics, 9-speed and 10-speed. We'll talk about both a little bit. Comma.NEO and some future predictions from Ford. And we've got some questions. So we'll get to all that momentarily. We have a nice, luxurious garage segment this week. Sam, you're driving the Volvo XC90 T8 PHEV, which I have also driven, and I found it quite nice, but also somewhat disappointing. So what's your take on it?
Well, I first drove the XC90 T6 a little more than a year ago, and that's the one. It's got the turbocharged and supercharged 2-liter 4-cylinder with 315 horsepower, roughly, I think. And yeah, I was really impressed with that one at the time. And this one adds an electric motor at the rear axle and a 9.5 kilowatt hour lithium ion battery, along with a plug, which nominally gives you about 14 miles of electric driving range. In general, I really like the XC90. I like the way it looks. It's got some peculiarities about it, ergonomically. The shifter. What do you think of the shifter?
I didn't like some of the ergonomic stuff. The shifter itself didn't bug me. What bugged me more was the weird little twist knob to turn it off and on.
Yeah, instead of a stop-start button for the engine, it's got a little knob that you twist left to shut it off and right to turn it on to start the engine. But I'm sorry, but the shifter itself, like, it does feel like a step backward for Volvo because it's another one of these instances where they try to reinvent the wheel and fix what wasn't broken. And so it is a little bit more confusing to use than, the shifters we've known and loved for the last, 50 years. Yeah, I mean, like most newer cars, newer vehicles now, there's no longer a mechanical linkage. The shifter doesn't actually shift anything. It's just a switch. It's an electronic switch. And, in this case, it's, a very stubby little shifter that's mostly, I think it's lucite. It's clear. It's transparent.
I believe it's Orifor's crystal.
Oh, okay. Well, whatever. It's transparent.
They're
and colorless.
going to be pleased to know you think it's lucite. That's awesome. Okay, carrying on. Sorry.
And you push it forward to engage reverse, pull it back towards you for drive, or the low range mode if you want extra regenerative braking. But the odd thing about it is when you start, if you push it forward once, it goes from park to neutral, and then you have to push it a second time to get it up to reverse. Similarly, going back if you want to go to drive. So if you only push it or pull it once, like you do in most other vehicles with this type of mechanism, usually, when you go from park or pull it to drive, it just goes straight to drive. It doesn't go into neutral. There's a separate motion somewhere to get into neutral. And in this case, if you do the same thing, you end up in neutral and the car can start rolling away on you if you're not paying attention.
Yeah, I find these new shifters, like the new convention, is rather infuriating. Mostly not even because it's a new behavior to learn, but because it's not as elegant. It's, you can't add simplicity, you need to remove complexity. I got that from HubSpot's manifesto. I was reading it today. It's really nice. It's completely not about this in particular, but I thought it was a really nice statement, and it makes a lot of sense. You can't make something easier to use by making it more complex, and that's exactly what Volvo has done, and that's what a lot of other manufacturers have done too. Is like you've got now 2 hops to get it into the gear you want. Like in a clutch situation where you're trying to do a 3-point turn and you got traffic coming down on you and you're on a busy road or something.
That's actually a real problem.
Yeah. It's going to be confusing. You're going to wind up putting it in park because you overshoot, or going to put it in neutral because you just get flustered and confused. And I'm surprised, especially that Volvo did this, because of Volvo's long history of making things clear and easy to use.
Yeah. I mean, of all these various types of electronic shifters, I think probably the design that I think works the best is the rotary knob, which, was amazingly enough was originally done by Jaguar on the XF back almost 10 years ago now when they launched that.
Yeah.
And in that case, the rotary knob, when you shut off the engine, it would retract and be flush with the center console, and then when you started it, it would rise up and you twist it. And it was fairly straightforward and fairly unambiguous as to what you were selecting. And that a similar type of design without the raising and lowering, has been used by a number of manufacturers now. Chrysler uses it on a bunch of their vehicles. Ford's using it now. So I think it's a pretty good layout. And I think all of these variations, or most of the variations on the making the traditional shift lever electronic, all leave something to be desired. And, I don't know if you remember a few months back, there was an actor whose name escapes me at the moment, but he played Chekhov in the new Star Trek.
Anton Yelchin.
Yeah.
I forget how to say it. Yeah.
I mean, he was killed in an accident in his driveway when he got out of his Jeep Grand Cherokee, which had one of these types of electronic shifters that, he thought he had put it in park, but in fact it was in neutral. And, the Jeep just rolled. He got out to get the mail out of his mailbox, and the car rolled down and crushed him.
Yeah. And so do you remember that like awkward couple years of shifter when they first introduced the 8-speed it was in the 300 and the Grand Cherokee, and it wasn't in those models for very long. I think it was also in the Charger, but it was a pain to get it in the right gear. That was it was finicky. Mm-hmm. I remember those. And I agree. The rotary knob is really the sort of best way to free up space on the console, which everybody's trying to do.
Right.
And also maintain something that's easy to operate, and I think a lot of people bagged on Jaguar because it has this extra motor to raise the thing. And it's like, Jaguar's famous, electric reliability thing rears its head,
or lack thereof.
Yeah, but I mean, overall, it's a very good implementation of it.
And I suspect that going forward, over time, the original style of shift levers, everybody kind of coalesced on a fairly consistent layout, with the Prindle lever for automatic transmissions, and I think. Over time, we'll probably see that happen again. Right now everybody's kind of experimenting with what's the best way to do an electronic shift. Yeah. So I think, we'll probably see, some, manufacturers going back to something a little more consistent, that works as they figure out, which ones actually work the best.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen this before. Like, it did take them a while to settle on the Prindle layout. It used to be a different selection, a different order of gears, and then they decided to standardize. And Chrysler had push button shifters back on the Torque Flights in the late 50s, early 60s. So this stuff comes around every now and then, and things get tried. But besides beating up on the shifter that we've been doing for like the last 10 minutes, what did you think of the rest of the XC90?
Oh, I like it. I mean, like I said, it's a great looking, big SUV, very comfy seats as always in a Volvo. I love the massage seat, that came in very handy the other day when I was driving back from Detroit. It's for such a big SUV, it's surprisingly fuel efficient. I've been averaging about between 27, 28 miles per gallon. When I come home, I plug it in, and, so when I leave the house, it's got a full charge in it. And, the combination of the electric driving and the the engine, it's got the same supercharged and turbocharged 4-cylinder that's in the T6. It works really well. And, one thing about this particular hybrid system, it's what's known as a through the road hybrid. So unlike, the Toyota systems or the Fords and most of the other systems that are on the market where the electric motors are incorporated into the transmission, this one, the front, the engine is in the front, driving the front wheels just as it does in a standard XC90. And then the electric motor is on the rear axle, and there's no mechanical connection between them. So the only blending you get is through the road, hence the name through the road hybrid.
Which seems like such a smart way to do it. And I do have to say, like the XC90 T8, it is impressive, which, I mean, there's like 400 something horsepower, which it's definitely not a slouch, but also I was impressed with just the way it's smoothly hands off and does its thing. And I'm assuming that some of that is because they don't have to try to coordinate two different power units through a single torque split device or whatever. Like, it's just, we're going to drive this set of wheels now and that set of wheels now. And it actually doing it through the road manages some of that smoothness a little better.
Yeah, mechanically, it's a lot simpler and a lot easier to control. The one downside to it, though, is because you have the electric motor at the rear axle. When you're braking, when you slow down, you get weight transfer to the front wheels, so there's less force, less vertical force on the rear wheels. So it's the same thing with any vehicle. When you're braking, most of your braking is done at the front axle. So that means that you don't get as much regenerative braking and you don't recover as much energy back into the battery, during harder braking. Light braking, and typical around town, it's not going to be that much of you're not going to see that much of a difference, but definitely, you're not going to be able to maximize the amount of regenerative braking you can get with this type of layout.
These are the kind of compromises that engineers are faced with.
Yeah.
I mean, I think overall they did a pretty good job for something that large to return 27 miles to the gallon for you. That's great. That's better than I did with it. I think I did about 24 or 25. But, the original XC90 was not exactly fuel efficient. It was kind of thirsty. The best you were going to do with that was probably low 20s.
Yeah,
on a
definitely.
day. Maybe on a highway only, you're going to start to creep up into the mid 20s. So it's quite a jump because it's a physically large vehicle and it's not like it's light. So
yeah, I mean, it's a big 3-row SUV, plenty of space for people. One other thing about this one that the previous XC90 I drove didn't have is support for Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Volvo's now rolled that out into their Sensus infotainment system. And if you haven't seen that system, it's an 11-inch touchscreen in the center, and it's in a portrait orientation, kind of like the Tesla Model S, but smaller than the Model S. And so what they do is when you enable Android Auto or CarPlay, it uses the lower half of the screen for the Android Auto controls, and then you still get other controls in the top half of the screen.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's some of the, the base Sensus system can be a little bit confusing to find some things. It's not the most intuitive interface.
Let's just say it's not good. It's not terrible, but it has a ways
I've seen worse. I mean, it's, it doesn't crash or anything, and it's responsive. It's just the UI, finding some of the features in there can be a little complicated and take a little more effort than it should while you're driving.
It feels like a system that was designed by an engineer who didn't really run it by a user interface, user experience specialist or focus group or something, because it's one of those things, and I get that sometimes in complicated software too that's developed, for engineers or by people who are very deep into it, and you say, well, like it doesn't work the way I work, and the question that you get back from the designers is, well, why would you do it that way? This is the way to do it. I was like, but that's not the way I'm going to do it. That's not what I want or what I expect. I know it makes perfect sense, this one way to do it in your head, but I found it, it's a very sort of, there's too many levels in there, so it's not flat enough, and it's almost like it's clicky. Is how I would describe it if it were actual like computer software. It's just there's too many steps to get to just a simple single function. And again, it's another area where I'm kind of shocked and a little disappointed in Volvo because their ergonomics has been, really the sort of the class of the industry for decades. And Sensus is just, Sensus until the XC90 didn't have as many functions in it. Now that they've put so many different pieces in there, like, yeah, it keeps the center console nice and clean, but all of the climate functions are in there. All of the infotainment is in there, navigation, like it's doing everything and it's not necessarily doing it all that well.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, the issues that we have with it are largely software related, so they could do a redesign and, do a software update in these vehicles to give a better user interface. So unlike, say, for example, some of the early My Ford Touch systems that also had performance issues, they didn't have enough power and they were unstable and crashed a lot. That isn't a problem here. So, if Volvo, wanted to go back and rethink some of the user interface, I think that they could deploy a software update that would improve that, and surface some of the most frequently used functions in the interface a little better so that it's easier to use.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to me, it was one of those things too, like it took almost the entire week I had the car to really get somewhat comfortable with it. So it's not like it's just a quick learning curve kind of thing. It's legitimately kind of confusing to use. But the XC90, I was going to go ahead.
One other thing about this one has the second generation Volvo Pilot Assist. When I previously drove the XC90 a year ago, it still had the original version that worked up to about 30 miles an hour. And, that one I found not to be terribly reliable. For example, it would disengage when you were crossing an intersection, which made it, not terribly useful.
That's not all that assisting.
And even on, on the freshly paved and freshly painted road that I live on, it had difficulty recognizing the lane markings. So, this updated version now works up to speeds of about 85 miles an hour, I think. And it works a lot better. It's still not as good as, say, Tesla Autopilot in terms of tracking the lanes on, when you're driving on the highway. On a straight line, it works fine. But when you come to curves, it's more reluctant to try to follow a curve on its own. So you do have to keep your hands on the wheel. It'll assist, but it won't try to really auto steer the way a Tesla does.
Do you think that that's by design?
Oh, absolutely. I think that was absolutely the Volvo engineers' intention. They were not ready at this point for this to be a hands-off design. And, so I think that they deliberately did this, so that customers would not get into the kind of scenario that many Tesla owners get into, where they become overconfident in the capabilities of the system, and then they end up doing things that they shouldn't be with the system.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a good trade-off at this point. So in my garage, I want to have a geeky little rant for a moment about the Ford Focus that departed this week. Do we have time for that?
We always have time for your rant, Stan.
All right. You should talk to my wife. Anyway, so all right. So are you familiar with the purpose of a compressor in terms of audio processing?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So for the audience who's not, a compressor it reduces the dynamic range. So it makes the loud stuff softer, and depending on how you set it, it brings up the quiet stuff. It takes, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It's like a sponge, right? Like
it basically tries to get everything closer to the same volume level.
Yeah, it squeezes it.
Yeah.
So that's fine. I love me some compressors. I use them all the time. They're one of my favorite tools. Limiter is very much like a compressor, except for it operates mostly on peaks, and it's more aggressive. It squeezes harder, and it's much faster to act and then let go. So anyway, brings me to the Sony audio system in the Ford Focus Titanium. Now, I drove this car for like a week, and it was, it took me a day or two to realize what was going on. Because, at a certain point in my drives, I'd just be like, man, what is the matter with this audio system? And I just, to the point where I'd just turn it down or shut it off. And I realized what I was hearing, and it was something and I blame Sony for this, not Ford, because this is something I've heard from Sony before. So what it sounds like what they're doing is they have a very aggressive limiter on the audio. And if you don't set these kind of tools correctly, they will cause distortion, even if they're done digitally. And that's what's going on is there's this limiter or compressor on every source, or at least very much the radio, where it squeezes the audio, but then it releases too fast. And so it gets like halfway back to like not doing anything. And then it goes, oh, hey, crap, I got to do something again. And it re-engages. And that makes like an audible, like kind of static or crackly sound. And it makes the sound, very weird and squishy. I know I'm using these completely artistic, useless terms. But
is there anywhere in there to disable that? Like, is that part of, a loudness control? That's usually what,
right.
On a lot of audio systems, you'll have a loudness button.
Right. And that's what I look for. Right. Yeah. And loudness is generally like often it's like, speed compensated volume. Loudness generally is like a Baxendal EQ that has, a very wide curve and just gently lifts the low and high frequencies because of the way your ear reacts. And there's all this science behind it. But at low volumes below about 85 decibels, sound pressure level, your ear doesn't react the same as the Fletcher-Munson curve. It's whatever, science. But, yeah. So anyway, there's this really aggressive, non-defeatable limiter that is fatiguing to listen to, and it causes audible distortion. So when you're in the car for a long period of time, you notice it, and it's really annoying. And I blame Sony for it because I've heard it before, and where I heard it before from Sony was when they introduced the EX1 camera, which is a digital video camera. This was a few years ago now, like 2009, 2010. The company I was working for, I hate the EX1 for a variety of reasons, but its audio circuits are the main reason, because it also had a non-defeatable limiter that would screw all your audio tracks from the field, and you cannot really uncompress stuff. You can use an upward expander and play around, but it just, once it's squashed, it's done. And so I was like, that's what I'm hearing, and I hate it because I didn't like working at the company that had them, and I didn't like the cameras, and Sony, it's all your fault. So...
And that's this week's segment of Car Audio This Week.
I have exercised the demons, but really, to the point where I tried to find out, like, who can I talk to at Sony or whoever else developed the Sony branded system for Ford to, like, figure out what's going on. Like, why do you have this algorithm on all your stuff? And it's clearly obnoxious and bad, and anybody with a set of trained ears knows what's going on. It might not bother most people, but it's really obnoxious once you figure out what you're hearing. But they made up for that with the fleet, because they dropped off a 2017 Kia Cadenza Limited. This is a really nice car, like really, really nice. Kia learns really fast. So I was thinking about this as I drove it today. The first sort of Kia luxury sedan attempt was the Amanti, right? It was just this...
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Funky thing. That was not good. It wasn't terrible, but it was...
No, let's be true. It was pretty terrible.
It was not noteworthy, shall we say.
It was one of the last... I think it was one of the last Kias to debut before the Peter Schreier era of design at Kia. And it had a very... kind of Baroque upright, sedan design, that was, it's a type of car that was popular, in South Korea in the 70s and 80s, among, executives, but, frankly, it was not particularly attractive. And like most Kias of that era, did not drive very well.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it's kind of the kind of car that was popular here during the late 70s.
That's true. Yeah.
But so they went from that, and the cadenza is just sort of like the third hop from there. It's really nice. It's solid. The materials are fantastic. The design is good. And they figured out ride and handling. It drives really well. I'm very impressed. And some of the features in it, because it competes now with like the Toyota Avalon is sort of its main competitor in my mind. I think I prefer it. I think it's coming in around $45,000 the way this one's equipped, and it's just really nice. All the stuff is easy to use. I really like it's. I can't complain, and that's not damning with faint praise. Like that's usually the line for me for Kia, especially when you start to get up in their fully loaded like luxury contender cars, is like, oh, it's almost there. I think this one's there. It's like a full-on contender. The 3.3 liter V6 is really punchy. The 8-speed auto does its thing pretty unobtrusively. All of the ergonomics are pretty easy. It has a nice button where you can shut the screen off at night, which again, me cranky old guy ranting. I like that. And it's roomy. It's comfy. It's got a big trunk. I don't know. Maybe I'm just recovering from the Focus. I don't know.
No, I mean, all of the recent Kias that I've driven have all been really good as well. I've been really impressed with them. Including the current generation Sportage, the Sorento, even the Forte 5 SX that I drove about a year ago. Was a lovely little quick hatch. 200 horsepower, 1.6 liter turbo. I've just really liked the current generation of Kias, and the Optima too is also a really good one. I've got a Cadenza coming in a couple of weeks, so I'll give you my thoughts on it then. But it's certainly a sharp looking car. I mean, Kia's modern design language, their current design language is, I think it's just outstanding. I mean, they make some of the best looking cars, mainstream cars out there.
Yeah, I love the way that they've basically, because they got Peter Schreier and his team, they've basically taken premium design and put it in the mainstream. It's fantastic. Like if you were to strip the badges off most Hyundais and Kias right now, they could credibly pass for something German.
Yeah.
Which I mean, it's
certainly they could pass for something that is much more expensive than the price tags that they're charging for them.
Yeah, and they present very well. It doesn't really feel like, oh, this is something that's gussied up, but it's not going to last. Like everything inside this Cadenza looks and feels nice and doesn't feel chintzy. I mean, we drive new cars all the time, so I don't know how well it holds up, but it doesn't feel like it's obviously just going to last until it's out of warranty and then fall apart. So that's in recent years, both Kia and Hyundai have been doing great, in quality surveys this year. Kia and Hyundai came in first and third in the JD Power initial quality study. And they've done well in the longer term durability surveys as well. So, and they offer good warranties. So, I think they're worth taking a shot on. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, and we've got a few Hyundais in the family. My brother-in-law, they've had, I think, 4 now. My mother-in-law has an 06 Sonata. They've all been fine. And it's not just having stuff too. Like that was one of the things where earlier, like, yeah, they had all the features, but they weren't integrated as well or something. This has radar cruise and all of that stuff, and it's tuned really well. So it actually, it works quite well versus like having it, but not really being all that good. So yeah, I've seen great strides and it's a really good sedan. I'm very impressed.
All right. So,
and its audio system sounds good.
no Sony.
Yeah, no, it's a Harman Kardon.
Okay.
So anyway, You had mentioned back when you were talking about the Volvo something. I guess it doesn't really match up, but one of the articles you wrote that we wanted to talk about this week is how everybody's sort of becoming a cartographer, and MobilEye is the leader in that, and it made me think of ways.
They want to be the leader.
So they want to be the leader.
But then who doesn't?
Let's not make any endorsements until they want to pay us. MobilEye, if you have a few $1 million sitting around, we'd gladly accept it to call you the leader.
Or at least, let's get this stuff into production and see, how well it really works.
Yeah. Well, I'm doing a terrible job of setting this up. So why don't you set it up?
All right. So last January at CES, MobilEye announced something called Road Experience Management, which they are now in the process of integrating with, MobilEye supplies most of the camera sensors that are used by most of the world's automakers for things like lane departure warning and lane keeping systems. And the key to what MobilEye does is they have custom system on a chip, custom processor that does the image recognition. So it takes, their system, they don't actually make the camera sensors themselves, the image sensors. Their system works with camera sensors from any number of suppliers. But what they do is they take the images that come off those sensors and they try to do the recognition of what's going on. And, their secret sauce is in their software. And so the latest thing that they've added to their software is this REM that it builds on what they've done before. So the idea with REM is as you drive down the road, the camera is, taking 30, 40 images per second. And then their processor is crunching through these and looking for and recognizing various targets and landmarks. So among other things, these systems will look for speed limit signs and other traffic signals, but they also look for any sorts of landmarks that are fixed in place that aren't moving around. So they look for things like pedestrians and cyclists, but they also look for fixed landmarks like overpasses and trees and whatever else isn't likely to move very much. And what they want to do with that, and this, keep in mind, this has not been implemented in any production systems yet. This will probably start coming out sometime later, 2017, 2018 in some production vehicles. But the goal is to be able to capture this data about, the locations, so when it captures this image, it also captures the GPS location. And, so now we know, okay, there's an overpass at this position, there's this building over at this location and so on. And the idea is as you drive down the road, it's collecting data that will become part of a high definition 3D map. So that when we get to the point where we want to have the cars start to drive themselves, they need to have this information because, if you've ever tried to use a GPS navigation system in a place like Manhattan or Chicago, in an urban canyon, you may have noticed that, or even used your phone in those areas, you may have noticed that they very often will put your location on the map somewhere, maybe several blocks or up to a half a mile away from where you actually are.
Well, yeah, that's just a terrible. It's such a bad environment for RF, and that's what GPS.
Well, it's not even. Yeah, it's not even just RF. GPS was designed by the military to help soldiers in the battlefield locate, get their position.
Right. Open battlefield, not urban.
Where you don't have skyscrapers around. And, the way it works is, you get fairly weak signals coming from a constellation of satellites orbiting the Earth, and based on, it triangulates off of multiple satellite signals and figures out your position. And as long as you're getting that signal straight from the satellite to your receiver, you can get a reasonably accurate result of where you are.
Right.
But if you're in an urban canyon where those signals are bouncing around, the timing of those signals, can get impacted if they're bouncing back and forth off these buildings, and so the calculation gets all messed up.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it's like trying to receive TV in town like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes the echoes are more powerful than the actual direct signal and stuff too, because of the way they propagate. So yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah. So, as everybody's trying to figure out how to make cars drive themselves, one part of autonomous cars is the sensors that will make that let the cars see what's around them. But they also, in order for an autonomous car to be useful, it needs to have maps, and it needs to be able to locate itself in space, so that when you summon an autonomous vehicle, it knows where it is and where you are and can figure out how to get to you. Well, if the GPS location tells it it's somewhere where it's not, that becomes a problem. So what everybody's working on now is these high definition maps that you can use to actually locate the car in space, in three-dimensional space on the road without the GPS, or augmenting, cross-checking against the GPS by looking at these other landmarks that you've already got a database of. And so MobilEye is one of the companies doing this with their road experience management. TomTom is also doing this stuff. They're doing it using TomTom has got their road DNA system that they're generating these kinds of high definition maps using LiDAR. Other companies, Civil Maps is another one that Ford invested in this past summer, and they're doing something similar as well, using various sensor data to generate these maps. And then what will happen is as you drive down the road, the system will look for information that's different from the database that it already has on board. So it's not going to transmit everything it sees, because that would just get too unmanageable. You'd have way too much, you'd saturate the wireless network. So what it'll do is, you've already got some data in the vehicle, and it'll look for anything that's new or different that's changed, and then transmit those things up to MobilEye's cloud. That'll get cross-checked. You get information from multiple sources to verify that that information is accurate, and then that gets distributed back to the vehicle fleet again. So your database gets updated. And MobilEye estimates that you can get a high definition map of the entire United States in about 64 gigabytes of memory, which is actually pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's that doesn't strike me as far-fetched. So are they going to actually, what are they looking to do with it? Are they going to look to license their technology? Because it doesn't seem like it's got to be like a living, breathing thing, right? Like this map, the moment you sort of disconnect it from that update cloud, it becomes not terribly useful.
Yeah, no, it is something that will be constantly updated, because, I talked about, looking for landmarks that don't move very much, but the reality is, that sometimes those landmarks do move. Bridges get torn down, they get rebuilt, new bridges get built, new buildings get built. So there will be changes over time. It's a relatively low frequency of changes that they're looking for. And then, in addition to that, there's also, the more real-time updates that that these various companies are looking for. So things like traffic conditions, road conditions, if there's a construction zone that's blocking a lane, things like that, information like that also needs to get transmitted and then distributed. And that is the idea, is that these various companies that are doing this will license it to manufacturers to use in their vehicles to provide the guidance systems.
Yeah, so it's very much like some of the other map providers, like Here, that's owned by Nokia, and I forget some.
Actually,
of the others.
Here is now, Nokia sold it earlier this year.
Did they?
Yeah, to a consortium of Daimler, Volkswagen, and BMW.
Oh, that's right. And so Here was based on, was it Navtech was part of it?
Yep.
So that I used to see Navtech, they were a leading map provider for a lot of stuff.
They got bought by Nokia about 10 or 12 years ago. Yeah. And then Nokia sold it off earlier this year. And all of those map systems, Here is probably the one. Here and TomTom are probably the two that are used the most by automakers for their in-car nav systems. And, those maps are, those are the basic road maps, that are kind of two-dimensional. They're starting to become three-dimensional now with topographical data that are also used, that we can talk about another time. But what they're doing, that's that's the most static layer. That's kind of the bottom layer. So navigation for automated vehicles, there's multiple layers of this. You've got the bottom layer of, here's the roads, here's what direction the roads go in, here's where they are, here's where the intersections are. And then you've got this next layer, which is what the road experience management stuff from MobilEye is, and what Civil Maps is doing, and what TomTom's doing with Road DNA. And then you've got the top layer, which is actually the routing and the guidance, and then also the in between there, the real time stuff as far as accidents and construction zones that changes dynamically. So you've got these multiple layers that will make up these navigation systems.
Yeah. So do you think that so MobilEye wants to be the leader? What makes you think that they may actually become the leader? And I think the reason why I brought up like here and Navtech and those other systems is like when those need to be updated, it's a much more manual process versus something that's connected and sort of updates on its own. But
that's something that's going to be changing in the coming years as well.
I'm sure.
Yeah. I think one of the advantages that MobilEye has is just that their image sensors are so widely used. And they work with a lot of manufacturers. A lot of the automakers use MobilEye's hardware already. So they already, they already know how to work with the auto industry. That they have a position in the auto industry. So I don't know that they will necessarily be the leader. Because there's a number of players that are coming into this, and I think that there's space for a number of companies to all play a part in this. So it'll be, I think that they certainly seem to have something that could be very useful and could work very well.
So they'll be a contender.
Yeah,
at the very least. Well, we'll have to keep an eye on MobilEye. That's. Sorry. Let's just shift gears and talk about transmissions. Hey, I did it again.
Now there's a segue.
So GM and Ford, they've done it again. The last time they did this, they developed a 6-speed front-wheel drive transmission, and they went back to the well and they developed a 9-speed front-wheel drive transmission, and at the same time, they also developed a 10-speed rear-wheel drive transmission. So these are getting out there now, and I think they're just sort of worth chatting about briefly.
Yeah. So the 9-speed, as you mentioned, is derived from the architecture of what GM and Ford developed almost a decade ago with their 6-speed that they used with their larger V6 engines and larger 4-cylinder turbos. That they have in most of their front-wheel drive platforms now. But 2 or 3 years ago, they got together and decided to update that to make a 9-speed and also to produce a new 10-speed for rear drive applications. So the 10-speed came out a few months ago, started production a few months ago. Ford is starting to roll them out now in the F-150s, and also they're putting them into new Super Duties, and then it'll be going into almost certainly going into the Mustang next year. And GM has started rolling them out in some of their trucks, and also it's going in the Camaro ZL1, this 10-speed, and then the 9-speed. GM did a briefing on it on Monday here in Detroit. And it's pretty interesting. They did some interesting stuff inside this transmission in order to add an extra planetary gear set and some extra clutches to make 9-speeds and get it into the same package envelope as the 6-speed that it's eventually going to replace. And in fact, GM actually started shipping the Malibu with the 2-liter turbo using this 9-speed back in September. So they've actually been on the road for several months already. They just never really announced anything until just recently. And then presumably Ford will be making some announcements in the very near future. Probably, I would guess probably at the Detroit Auto Show next month, we'll probably hear something from Ford about when the first applications for this one. But I would expect cars like the new Lincoln Continental and some of the 2-liter turbo Fusions and cars like that will be among the first ones to get the 9-speed.
Yeah, and It's not anything like the 9-speed. The what is it? It's not a ZF, right? It was designed partially with Getrag, the one that Chrysler and
No,
Land
that's the
Rover were
ZF.
using. It is the ZF. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not anything like that, right? This is just basically a straight up planetary automatic.
Yeah, it's got 4 planetary gear sets and a whole bunch of clutches. It's all electronically controlled. Supports both mechanical shift linkages and total electronic linkages, like we talked about earlier with Volvo. And one of the interesting things they did in there, in the between the first and second gear shift, typically most automatic transmissions have a one-way clutch and then a two-way clutch or a standard clutch that they use in combination to give you coast down and things like that. And what GM designed is they designed a selectable one-way clutch mechanism that combines the functionality of those two things into one unit and actually allowed them to make the transmission an inch narrower than it would have been otherwise. So that's how they got it into the same package size as the 6-speed. So that means that anywhere where they use the 6-speed today, they can just drop in this new transmission and it'll fit. They don't have to re-engineer everything around it.
And that's kind of important when you've got a bunch of cars that you're looking to get efficiency gains out of, but you've already engineered that engine bay and there's just not the space necessarily for something larger. It's not like the old days where you could probably shoehorn stuff in. Like these are pretty tight packages now. Most of the space is accounted for. So, and you're seeing Porsche's doing the same thing. They've re-engineered their gearbox, added an extra shaft in there, and, did a bunch of stuff. But the package size is the same, which means that even without a full redesign of the car, you can make a significant change to its efficiency by changing this transmission that fits in the same space.
Right. And so, 9-speed, I talked to the GM, to Chris Marr from GM, who's the executive chief engineer, I think, for transmissions, about, what's the upper limit, on the number of gears in an automatic transmission. And really for front wheel drive cars, 9 is probably going to be the upper limit, the practical upper limit, because then, as you add more and more ratios in there, the incremental improvements in fuel economy get smaller and smaller. And also just trying to pack all that hardware in there, it just, it's not going to you're not going to be able to package much more than 9 in there. With the longitudinal layouts, for the trucks and rear wheel drive cars, you've got a little bit more space to work with. Although even that 10-speed, they packaged that into the same space that was used by the existing 6-speeds that Ford had in their trucks. So, having the extra gears, allows them to have smaller steps, smaller ratio steps in between between the individual gears, and then also still have a larger spread from low, from first through ninth, a larger overall ratio spread, so they can try to keep the engine, closer to its, efficiency sweet spot, more of the time. Kind of like what you try to do with a CVT, a continuously variable transmission, but it's, it feels better than a typical CVT. Most people don't like the way CVTs feel, when the engine just revs up to a speed and then stays there as the car accelerates. Having a step ratio transmission like this is generally more pleasing to customers.
Yeah, CVTs generally feel pretty terrible. They're okay around town. It's just that there are times where they're just...
Nissan does a good job with them.
Yeah. And the Honda CVTs have been pretty decent. But, there's always situations where they're all just they're going to display their constantly variable nature.
Yeah.
Driving these... I found driving the 9-speed in the Chryslers was kind of like, yeah, all right, whatever. You unless you count ratios, you kind of don't really know. And I think that's the point, is that it's designed in a way to have a ratio for all situations. It doesn't mean that it uses all 9 all the time. Clearly, ninth gear is going to be a pretty stiff overdrive. So depending on that ratio spread, it's maybe not going to use ninth much at all. But on the other hand,
it depends on how you drive, where you drive. The way they've got it set up, it actually can use ninth quite a bit, quite frequently. But it can also, it's capable of skipping gears, so it doesn't have to shift through all 9 gears, to go from first to ninth. It depends on, how hard you're getting on the accelerator, or braking, so it'll go through different sequences depending on the current conditions, the load conditions, and how hard you're accelerating.
Yeah. And I hope that their programming has taken a step up. Not that it's been bad in some of the other transmissions, but I found that automatics now are really, really reluctant to give you what you want. You ask for a downshift and it pauses. Like there's this sort of like palpable deliberation, and I'm sure that some of it is like they've programmed the transmission to not downshift unless it's really clear that that's the intent, because again, fuel economy. But as a driver, I came up driving cars that, yes, they only had 4-speed transmissions, so generally there's only one direction to go. That's down, and they give it to you pretty quickly, and they had all manual, all mechanical controls. So you give the pedal a squeeze, the kick down cable tightens, boom, you get your shift. Where these things, and I don't think that the electronic controls make it slower by their very nature. I think that they're designed to make it sort of pause like that, because I find that when I don't get what I want, I push the pedal harder and I get like 2 gears instead of 1. And so I feel like there's kind of like that reaching for efficiency that you're missing out on some of the efficiency by frustrating the driver. So
yeah, I mean, I haven't driven this one yet, so we'll see. But they said that they worked really hard on, trying to make it feel as responsive as possible to the driver, but also keeping it refined and keeping the shift smooth. So it'll be interesting to see how it behaves on the road.
Yeah, and
it's good for a couple of miles per gallon of fuel economy.
Yeah, and I mean, the restrictions or the requirements have not been backed off. So
yeah, at least not yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll get there. There's a lot of other dismantling to go on first.
We'll see what happens on January 20th or 21st.
Yeah, we'll just move on. Speaking of dismantling, the Comma.NEO is the open source. I guess it's the source of the Comma 1 that George Hotz was going to introduce with his Comma.AI company. So it's just basically the source code for his self-driving system. You can download it and you can get a bunch of other stuff, and you can make your own car if you want to make your own self-driving car. It's not quite that simple, but it's kind of intriguing, and it's an interesting pivot. Sam, do you think you're going to download this stuff and get yourself like the one specific phone that it runs on so you can try it out?
No. I mean, I spent many years, doing this kind of stuff, doing embedded software for vehicle control systems. And those years are behind me. So I don't have any plans to download this stuff. But I'm sure that there's engineers at every automaker that's working on autonomous systems that have already pulled that code to take a look at what Hotz was doing.
So what do you think they're going to find? I mean, I pure speculation, of course, but my suspicion is that he's oversimplifying it. Like, it's just making it seem easier than it really is. Like I think you even said it. He sort of took care of all the easy stuff, and now the hard part is making the system like predictable and reliable and all of those things that just weren't there.
Yeah, I mean, with any kind of control system like this, the basics, the fundamentals of making it work are usually fairly straightforward. I mean, occasionally there's problems that are much harder to do, but in this case, something like what he was trying to do here, make a car, follow the lane markings and drive down the road by itself. That part is pretty straightforward, at its core, but it's all the other stuff around that, like recognizing, predicting what other cars are going to do, recognizing pedestrians and cyclists and potholes and, animals that run out in front of you. Those are all the things that make the problem a lot harder.
Yeah. And I guess though, having this out there, it may get there. And it's kind of like the new version of hot rodding, I guess, in a way, where you've got this solution that is developed completely outside of the automakers, but you can sort of roll your own self-driving car. I mean,
yeah, and there's plenty of companies doing it, like Nutonomy, and so there's a few other companies in Silicon Valley that are working on this stuff. Cruise Automation was doing this, and they got bought by GM for what may have been as much as $1 billion. So, there's plenty of people out there trying to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I just wonder if you've got your own Honda or Acura vehicle that this stuff will work with, and you've invested in the, what is the phone? There's just one particular phone.
I forget which phone it was.
It's in the story that was published on,
the OnePlus 3.
Yeah. It's yes, the source code is available, but there's still a lot of work you have to do to get it like up and running, and you're gonna hack your car a little bit to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to tap into, you need to have a car that's already got the lane keeping and adaptive cruise control system on there, and then you take off the camera module that's mounted on the windshield, and it actually plugs into the wiring harness where the lane keeping camera normally goes to get into the CAN bus on the car. So that's how it actually controls it, is through that connection on the windshield.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? He's got chutzpah. I like this guy. He seems a little bit like a loose cannon, but that's all right. He's
a little loose.
Yeah. I mean, he's basically saying, the NHTSA can't really regulate this because open source software is pretty much free speech. And if the U.S. government doesn't like the project, I'm sure there are plenty of other countries that will. Again, like that's just a yay, hooray for the entrepreneurial spirit. I want to see where it goes. I do.
Yeah. And I'm sure that, there's already, like I say, a bunch of people that have already downloaded it and are going through the code, trying to figure out what it's doing and how to make it better.
Yeah. Well, and so, we'll keep an eye on that one. And as long as we're predicting the future, Ford was doing that on their own. They just released their futurist, which is an actual job at Ford Motor Company, is Cheryl Connolly. And so for the last, I want to say it's like 5 years or so, they've been releasing a future report, basically projecting the trends that they think are going to be noteworthy going forward. And I think it's kind of funny. We can talk about some of these trends that really sort of the high points. But of course, these trends line up really beautifully with what Ford has already committed that they're going to do. Gosh, what a coincidence.
Well, actually, if you if you go through these various iterations of this report that Cheryl has published over the last several years, and I know Cheryl, I've met her and talked to her on a number of occasions. The trends report that she publishes every year is not actually looking at automotive trends. I mean, she works for Ford, but she's she and her team aren't really looking at automotive trends. They're looking at larger societal trends and trying to figure out how that's going, what is going on in society? How is society changing? And then, Ford, looks at that and says, okay, well, what do we have to do as a business to fit into this society? And so that's the sort of thing that, is driving Ford's current, their recent efforts, in mobility, the establishment of Ford Smart Mobility LLC, and the things they're doing with autonomous vehicles and ride hailing, and all these other things that they're working on. And the latest edition of the trends report that just came out, one of the more interesting aspects of it that I've found is this idea of, trust is the new black. And, what she found from her studies is that, increasingly, consumers are, amazingly enough, distrustful of corporations, governments, and the media. And becoming more so. I can't imagine why. But
we're a nation of skeptics, and that's okay. We've been taught to sniff out the bullshit, right? So what we've been taught.
Unfortunately, I think while we may see that there's bullshit out there, we aren't necessarily very good at recognizing what is actually the bullshit.
Yeah, that's true.
But that's a whole other thing. But just this whole idea of trust being so important, I think, is actually one of the things about that I think is critically important. If we're ever going to deploy autonomous vehicles, it's going to be important. It's going to be critical that people are actually able to trust these things and trust that they will behave in the way that they expect. And last year when this whole Volkswagen diesel scandal broke, I wrote a couple of different articles about this, and one of the themes of that was that, trust, the real danger of what Volkswagen did is not so much, what it might do to people's perceptions of diesel engines, or anything else, but it's actually a potentially larger problem around this idea of trust, because what Volkswagen did was done entirely in software. You always hear everybody referring to the defeat device that they used, but there's actually no hardware device that was in those vehicles. What they did was they did something in the software that allowed the system to cheat, and nobody caught it. And, if consumers feel that, okay, here's one company that did this, they cheated using software, for something as relatively benign, compared to autonomous vehicles, of cheating on the emission controls. What happens when you get a car that's fully capable of driving itself, and you start doing things in there that could be a lot less benign, if the car starts to run people down, or, doesn't behave properly. So trust is a real critical issue here. And, I think it's definitely a good point for her to be making in this report.
Yeah, and I agree that, and I think we'll get there too. Like, I'm not so worried about trusting the engineering and refinement that's gone on. Like, I feel like when these companies that know they're exposed to lots of liability by introducing autonomous cars that people are going to naturally rely upon, they're going to have done their homework. It's more of the smaller, the one that freaks me out a little bit more, and is the sort of DIY solution that we were just talking about, like that sort of George Hotz.
Yeah, I mean, do you trust George Hotz?
No, and it's not because I don't think he's untrustworthy. It's just because he doesn't have the resources. He's one guy. It's the same as you're watching Tesla. You'll get some of its lunch eaten by General Motors and Ford and these big, heavily resourced companies with a diverse product offering. They have deeper pockets and they can sustain longer. And it's not that they want to go out and crush Tesla, although I'm sure they wouldn't mind. But they can do things and commit resources that Tesla just can't, and George Hotz just can't. So because of their sort of vast corporate size, they know they have to get it right, and they will, because otherwise they'll get their pantsuit off and they'll go under. But does that have a chilling effect on those of us who at this point choose to drive ourselves? Like, what I don't trust is that we're going to be able to share the roads well with the self-driving cars, not because I don't trust autonomous cars. I already use automated technology, and I feel like it's going to be 99.9% of the time you can trust that stuff. It's the human factor that's the issue. And when we're trying to share the roads, I don't trust what my sort of my I don't want to say colleagues, but my fellow road users are going to do. But, we're the real unpredictable wild cards in that situation. So I don't trust that we can actually, find that happy medium. It's going to have to be all or nothing.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you on that.
That's a really dark thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but Ford's predictions are kind of interesting. And they're worth checking
like
out.
I said, she doesn't, predict that, she doesn't make predictions about, what kind of cars we're going to be driving in 10 years, but it's these larger societal trends and how that might impact the way we move around.
Yeah. I do love the idea that they say punctuality is a dying art and that procrastination is a strength. I love that procrastination it can be a strength thing, because I do my best work by backing myself into a time corner and then I have to produce. It's just a terrible way.
And frankly, I think most creative people do that. I think I know I do. A lot of writers are like that. They spend time, mulling over things, or they'll get the germ of an idea and then go off and do something else. And then, at the last minute, as it all comes together, they'll sit down to do their story or do their video or whatever it is they need to do.
Right. And you kind of come away from that going like, if only I had an extra 3 days. It's like, well, stupid. You had an extra 3 days, but you decided not to use it. Yeah. But it's just how the process goes. It's, I'm pleased to see that I'm not such a freak. All right. Well, we've exhausted our topics, but we did have a couple of questions come in. So why don't we hit those, and then we can wrap it up and give your voice a rest.
All right. First off, we got Zach with a fairly long email, but I'm gonna summarize here. He's started the process of looking for a new car to replace his lightly modded 2010 Genesis Coupe. He's 31, no kids, lives in DC, and hybrid or some kind of electrification is attractive, as well as adaptive cruise. Android Auto are mandatory requirements. He doesn't have access to a plug-in charger, so a battery electric or a plug-in hybrid aren't viable for him. He's looking for something under $30,000, new or relatively new. And he wants things like LED or HID headlights, good handling, quiet interior, durability. And he's fine without all-wheel drive. And he gave us a list of some cars that he's considering. And right off the bat, we'll disqualify some of these because he did say that Android Auto is a must. So the Infiniti Q50 hybrid is off the list because Nissan and Infiniti have not given any indication of if or when they're going to do Android Auto. Similarly, the Prius Prime, which I have not yet driven, Toyota has said they have no plans to do Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. And then let's see. Then the rest of the ones on the list here, he's got the Ford, the Fusion Platinum Hybrid, the Sonata Hybrid Limited, a new or slightly used Volt or Cadillac ELR, and the Accord Hybrid Touring. And then finally, there's also he says, I know I can get a Mazda 3 or 6 or Honda Civic Sport Touring Hatch, Elantra all day long with my requirements. The question is really about the best HEV cars that met my requirements for $30,000. So what do you think?
Well, I think I know who this guy is. First of all, so what's up, Zach? Second of all, I was gonna say, like, in my head as I'm sort of tallying up the requirements, the Honda Accord Hybrid certainly fits that bill. The Sonata Hybrid Limited is another good choice. Those are two hybrids that drive quite well, and for me, the driving experience is kind of the key. I also like just the regular Prius is a good driving hybrid. If Android Auto is an absolute must, yeah, and it's not going to have it. Like you said, and the Toyota system and the Entune system is just like, it's not great. But it's okay. So if you can cross that requirement off your list, the Prius is not bad. And I think like the Fusion, I like the Fusion hybrid. It drives quite well again, but you're going to find a lot more utility, I think, in the Fusion because it's a hatchback. So, I mean, in the Prius because it's a hatchback. So I guess I'd say like everyday usable hybrid. It's really, 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 really hard to beat the Prius. From a driver's perspective, I really liked the Sonata hybrid and the Accord hybrid. The Accord hybrid almost feels like a luxury car in touring trim. So, those three are sort of it for me.
Well, frankly, I think my choice out of all of these here would probably be I should have also crossed the Volt and ELR off the list because those are plugins, and if he doesn't have access to a plug for charging, then those would be a waste of his time and money. But the Accord is really nice, as is the Sonata. But frankly, I'd be inclined to go with the Civic Sport hatchback. Because it does have all of the things he's looking for. It's got adaptive cruise control with the Honda Sensing package, which is, Honda only charges $1,000 for that package, on any trim level of the Civic. It's got Android Auto and CarPlay support. It's a great handling car, and a lot of utility, as you mentioned with the Prius, especially with the Civic hatch, with the you got a big hatch opening in the back. You can fold the back seats down, get big things in there when you need to. It's a lot of fun to drive. And, the Sport, you get a little bit of extra power out of the 1.5 liter turbo. And it's actually really fuel efficient. It's not going to hit, the 50 miles per gallon that you're going to get out of the Prius. But it can easily get, mid 30s combined and get over 40 on the highway. So I would seriously take a look at the Civic Sport hatchback.
Yeah, I can't fault the Civic. Can you actually get the Civic with the LED headlights as well?
That I'm not sure of. I don't think it has LED lights.
I thought I don't know. I'm not completely up on Honda's lineup, but I was actually surprised about how well their cars are equipped.
And one thing I really do like about Honda's implementation of Android Auto that so far no other manufacturer is doing is when you're using Google Maps. And actually, the same thing applies for CarPlay as well. When you use the smartphone maps for navigation, it will actually mirror the turn prompts in the instrument cluster. The same way that the embedded navigation does. So when you use a built-in navigation system in most modern cars, when you've got a right turn coming up, it'll show you in the instrument cluster, right turn at the next street. And most of the time when you're using Android Auto or CarPlay, you only see those prompts on the central screen. You don't see them in the instrument cluster right in front of you. Honda so far is the only company that's actually doing that and mirroring those prompts in the instrument cluster.
But the downside is that you've got to put up with the rest of that infotainment system, which is, if you're using Android Auto, then, that's not, you're never really going to see that anyway. That's true.
It's not the worst infotainment system I've used.
Okay. It's not good. I'm real picky, apparently.
But, when I get a car with Android Auto in it, I only ever use Android Auto anyway. So.
Yeah. And that's fair. That's why it's there.
Yeah. And, if you want to have, a better built-in infotainment system as well, then, I would definitely recommend Sync 3 and the Fords, which is really good. Actually, the Hyundai and Kia infotainment system is also excellent.
Yeah, Uvo is quite good. And it's funny because I think Uvo is actually like an earlier version of Sync in some ways that, once it eclipsed the licensing window, Microsoft's.
Well, the original, when they first launched Uvo back in 2010, it was based on the Microsoft car platform, but they only did that for a couple of years and then they switched over and
so clearly I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's no longer using the Microsoft embedded car platform anymore.
That makes some sense given that. Yeah. All right. Well,
all right.
Let us know what you buy. and if there's any other guidance. In the meantime, we do have another question.
And if this advice was like all the other advice we've ever given on a podcast, I'm sure you'll buy something completely different. So
hey, we didn't say GTI or Miata, so there's that.
That's true. Yes. Okay. We did stick to the ones that were on his list.
Right. Either one of those would also be a solid choice. All right. So this one comes from Jonathan. He says, my question this week is, what's your take on the Alfa Giulia Quadrifoglio, Turbo 4, 280 horsepower, all-wheel drive, turbocharged edition? Will it grab a piece of the sports sedan market? Will consumers like that it's got an 8-speed that shifts in 100 milliseconds? Will BMW lease owners give Alpha a shot? Are BMW lease owners bored with BMW and Mercedes, and will they take that shot? Will the 500 horsepower Quadrifoglio make M3 owners passionate for the Italian brand? And now the tough question, will the Stelvio CUV successfully take on the X3 and the very successful Porsche Macan and Jaguar F-Pace? Okay, so there's several parts there. First, what is your take on the Alfa Giulia Quadrifoglio and Turbo 4 280 horsepower all-wheel drive Sport TI edition? So what's your take?
I think neither one of us have driven the Giulia yet.
Correct.
But from everything I've heard from people that actually have driven it in the last month or so, since they started doing some media drives, it's actually really, really good. So it'll be real interesting to watch that. Will BMW owners be willing to take a shot on the Alpha? I think we're just going to have to wait and see. Traditionally Alpha, has not had a great reputation for quality and reliability, but these are very different from traditional Alphas. Certainly the Fiat brand hasn't done great so far. The Fiat 500 in its various iterations has not been the sell as big as anywhere near as big a seller as Fiat Chrysler had hoped.
Yeah, but so that's part of my thought is like it's not necessarily down to the car. The way Fiat has rolled out their dealerships here has not been stellar.
Right.
The experience is not great. And they sort of rolled it out with, one car. Now they've got 3 cars, basically. They've got the 500, the 500L, and the 500X. They're not bad stuff. They're just, they're not really putting enough of a sort of diligence into it. And I think they actually had kind of onerous requirements from the dealer side of things to actually get a Fiat franchise and, sell it. So I wonder how they're going to handle Alpha. On the same, in the same way. Yes, the Giulia is going to grab a piece of the sports sedan market, probably a very small piece, just because they're going to be hard to get.
Yeah.
There's probably going to be some consumers that like the spec sheet racing where it'll shift real fast with the paddles. I don't personally know that that's going to matter to a lot of them.
I think the key is, that, like, as I said, from all I've heard, the Giulia drives really well. So from a performance standpoint, it should be great. And, it certainly has, that Italian style. So if you're looking for something different, that isn't, BMWs and Mercedes and Audis are, they're good, but they're pretty commonplace these days.
Yeah. And I agree
and if you
with
want
that.
something different, then the Alpha is going to be the way to go.
Yeah. And it's the same reason why people buy the Abarth, right? The 500 Abarth, because they don't want a Mini Cooper. Same kind of thing. And so, yes, there will be some that do want something different and they'll give Alpha a shot. I don't think that the owners who are leasing BMW and Mercedes cars are really bored with those cars. I think they're leasing those cars mainly because they are in certain parts of this world. That's your Camry.
Yeah.
It's a status car. It's just sort of like the default choice for a certain group of people. They lease them, then they're not really car people. They're brand people. I don't think they may, if Alpha successfully gives its brand a little bit of a burnishing when they reintroduce the Giulia to this market. Yeah, it may get picked up by those people, but I don't think they're going to really go out and choose it unless, like you said, they're looking for something different.
I think, my guess is it'll probably get a fairly small piece of the pie.
Yeah.
But I think that the people, especially in the early years that go that way, will probably find that they really like what they got.
Yeah, I think so. And I kind of feel like it's going to be destined to be sort of a niche classic in some way, like depending on how they manage to do in this market. I'm a little tenuous on whether they're going to stick around. So, the Giulia may be one of those cars that comes and goes, and it has just a single generation or not even a full generation here. And, the Stelvio, again, like, yeah, it might. I mean, it's never going to be the huge player that the X3 is. Everybody's crazy for crossovers, luxury crossovers, especially with European brands. The Macan is everywhere now. Those things are like roaches around Boston. So yeah, I mean, with an Alpha badge, I feel like that's a product that's probably got more potential than the Giulia. It's the right vehicle for this market. But again, like, where's their stomach? I haven't seen that Fiat Chrysler has really had a stomach to pull through with some of the plans that have been laid out. Like we see constant realignment of the plans and like, oh yeah, that thing that was going to happen. Yeah, it's not happening now. So,
yep.
I don't know. Yeah, that's about my take on it. It sounds like you agree.
Pretty much. Yeah.
All right, good. Well, then we're done.
All right.
We have a Facebook page now. So WheelBearings Media is out there. That's our podcast. I'm sure you can find it. Also, you can email us at wheelbearingscast@gmail.com. We are at WheelBearings No Vowels on Twitter. And I'm Boston_Auto. You are at Sam Abel Samid. I think I got everything right. We don't have a phone number this time.
No, I think that's about it. If you want to send us your email or comments, you can use the contact us link on the webpage at WheelBearings Media, and we'll have
reviews.
As usual, we'll have some links in the notes along with the episode on the site. So if you want to read Cheryl Connolly's trends report, we'll have a link to it there, as well as the other stuff that we've written in various places, including on my company blog at Navigant Research. That's about it, I guess.
Yeah, so go listen, go forth and prosper, leave us some feedback and some reviews on iTunes or whatever other podcatcher you're using. And
tell all your friends.
Exactly. Tell everyone. And we'll catch everybody next time on episode 7.
All right.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.